Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome everybody to Moorish Talk Live 100. I'm your host, Tarhaka Amana El Bay, and today we're going to be dealing with Moorish science and nationality. What is Moorish science? Who are the Moors? Now I'm going to deal with this today from a whole different perspective. Now, I was told a long time ago that it takes a Moor to teach a Moor. You can't go to no college, no university, no public school system, the American government. You can't go none of these places to learn nothing about how to be a Moor. Now, the way I see it is not enough for you to put a fez on and tell somebody you're a Moor when you don't know nothing about being a Moor. You should have access to information that not only you know, but that you use on a day-to-day basis because you know it. That's the way I see it. See, the United Nations has already stated that every man has a right to a nationality. And every man has a right to change his nationality, if he so please. But now, how do you be somebody from somewhere else, something else, and walking around telling somebody you're a Moor? What is the difference between you and somebody else? What is it that you know that everybody ain't up to speed on? What is it? We're going to get down into a few things this morning about this Moorish science and nationality. Now, I have several books here on my desk. I got the Noble Ali, The Last Prophet. I got The Great Meeting is On, Quran Questions for Moorish Americans, 101s, 102s, and the ADAP level. And then we have the Holy Quran, the grand national emblem of the Moorish America, the original book of the seven seals as revealed to the divinity prepared by the prophet Noble Drew Ali. Okay, now we got these today. Everybody, you ain't finna get it all. Because in my opinion, you can't even handle it all. Brother Moors, I'm not talking to y'all. Now, I'm talking to other people that may be aspiring to be Moors. Okay, you might say, man, I'm finna go ahead and do my nationality. I'm finna go ahead. I'm tired of this stuff about not knowing who I am. I'm tired of that. It says here, the Moorish Americans are a true nation of people. Number one, it says, and this is the prophet speaking, say, I forgive you for everything that you did before I came. Now you are responsible for your deeds now. Moors are not held accountable for the oaths taken and the deeds done while they were in a coma and without knowledge of self. Okay? We'll stop right there. We're coming back. Now think about that for a minute. Let it sink in. Now, in my opinion, this is what the Moors should be knowing by now. You should know the 9 code by now. I put this information out a long time ago to all of y'all, wherever y'all was, everywhere you was. Now, you know, if you got a circle, 360-degree circle, do the math. 3 plus 6 plus 0 is what? 9. Now, keep in mind, we all know that the 0 don't have no value. That's just nothing. So we don't count it as nothing. But you have to be careful because people will use that and act as though it is something. But when I deal with numbers and money, I go from 1 to 9. A lot of people say 0 to 9. I go from 1 to 9. If I need a 0 from somewhere, I just pick up something from somewhere. It's absolutely nothing anyway. So that's how we deal with that. Now, if you cut that circle in half, now you're at 180 degrees. 1 plus 8 plus 0 is still 9. That's the 9 code. If you, and I want to say something right here about that circle before we go any further. And I told people this a long time ago, and I see there are people who is taking advantage of it, everybody except people that look like me. I don't know nobody. I'm not saying they ain't out there, but I don't know nobody that's taking advantage of it. Because there's a place out here where I am, and we got churches and houses and buildings all over the place. This church is not built like your average house or average building. Your average house is the average building who got a square foundation, right? Okay, you go in a room, you got a square room. Okay, so everything, because when you got a square, everything is at all 4 corners of that square is at a 90-degree angle. All right, so when you do the math on that, you got 90 degrees in one corner, 90 degrees in the second corner, 90 degrees in the third corner, 90 degrees in the fourth corner. 9 and 9 is 18. 18 and 18 is what? That's 36, ain't it? 18 and 18? 36. So 6 plus 3 is 9. Right? But now this church remains, the whole foundation, the whole building, everything is in a circle. And when tornadoes and hurricanes and windstorms and everything come around, it damages everything but that church. It's amazing. Now I want to ask you a question. Have you ever seen an Eskimo with a square TP? No. Have you ever seen a Native Indian with a square TP? Or the Eskimo with a square igloo in it? No. You see, when you can look right there on TV and you can see the diagrams of a tornado. It's always in a circular motion. You ain't going against nothing. But you got all these square buildings, square foundations, square everything, and getting blown down. You ever seen a hurricane diagram? Always in a circular motion. And it come in and wreak havoc because you got all these square things. Now what has taken place is we got people down here now, they are builders, and they are building houses now with circular foundations and circle of this and circle of that. And hurricane come in and nothing in the community wasn't touched. You might have had a few shingles blowed off here and there, what have you, but no major damage. Instead of going against nature, why don't you go along with it a little bit? Okay? Now, let me get on down, finish getting back down on here in this 9 code, because this thing goes on and on and on and on. Now, the Moors know that if you got a pie, a round pie, you cut it straight down the middle or cut it straight across, now you got 4 sections. Each one of the sections is a 90-degree angle. 9 plus 0 is 9. And if you take one of them slices out of that pie, you got 3 corners. Now you're at a 60-degree angle. 3 times 6 is what? That's 18. 1 plus 8 is still 9. The Moors know that we got 1,440 minutes in a day. Add it up. You come to 18. 8 plus 1 is 9. The Moors know you got 86,400 seconds in a day. Add it up. 8 plus 6 plus 4 is what? 18. 1 plus 8 is 9. 10,080 minutes in a week. 1 plus 8 is 9. 525,600 minutes in a year. 1 plus 8 is 9. The Moors know this. The Moors also know that you can add all the numbers up from 1 to 9, leave off the 9, and just count from 1 to 8. What you got? You got 36. 6 plus 3 is 9. Let's add the 9 in. That's 45. 5 plus 4 is 9. All around you. Now we go to elementary school, we go to kindergarten, elementary school, junior high school, and then colleges and universities, and come out of there and with all these college degrees and all of this so-called knowledge. And when I asked these people, I said, well, you have a college degree? Yes, I got actually I got 2 bachelors and a master's, or 2 masters and a bachelor, whatever, whichever way it go. I said, well, great. Tell me who you are without telling me your name. Then there's dead silence. Y'all hold on a minute. We're going to go to the commercial. We'll be right back. Okay, everybody. October the 26th, right here in Duval County, Jacksonville, Florida, the Black Vegan Fest will take place. Live bands, live entertainment. Professional chefs will teach you how to cook healthy. If you are a vendor, go to www.urbangeoponics.org and sign up. Bring your fishing gear with you. If you're a fisherman, we got the river right in the back of the property. We'll teach you how to grow your own food. Teach your children how to do the same thing. You'll learn how to prepare meals healthy. There'll be fun and games for the whole family. October the 26th, the Black Vegan Fest, right here in Jacksonville, Florida. Don't miss it. Make sure you got some cash with you, because vendors will be on hand and they'll be selling their wares. October the 26th, the Black Vegan Fest, right here, Jacksonville, Florida. Don't miss it. Be here. Let me make sure I got this right. You have a mortgage. You were told the bank would give you a loan for your home. But when you got to the bank, they didn't give you anything or sign anything. But presto changeo, you have a new mortgage. Then you find out your mortgage has been sold to another company you don't know and don't have any contract with. It seems to me something is wrong. When you walked out the bank, you had some papers in your hand, but no check. Let's get to the bottom, down to the bottom of this kind of stuff. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Let's bring the fraud to a close. How about that? This kind of stuff is going on all over the United States, but most people don't even understand what to do about it. TarhakaDebtElimination.org. All right, Moses, we back. Now, what I want to do this morning is perform an experiment. And I want everybody to participate in that. You don't have to be a Moor to participate in that. You don't have to have proclaim your nationality. And if you ain't got around to it, don't worry about it right now. But eventually get around to it. And we're gonna deal with this nationality thing too. I want for the next 6 months. This is just a question that I'm dealing with, and this is for people who look like me. All right, me and you, we look alike. We look alike. Moors, Negro, colored, black, Afro-Americans, African-Americans, and other ones who may think they the ends. But anyway, let's do this right here for a minute. For just 6 months now. I ain't talking about forever. Just 6 months. Let's try this. And I want you to use your imagination for a minute. Just use your imagination. Here is number one. I want everybody that look like you and me to step out of the following: the NBA, the NFL, hair salons, nail salons, and all beauty salons that are not owned and controlled by people that look like me and you. Think about that for a minute. Use your imagination. Take a few minutes. I'm gonna give you a little time to think about it. Okay? Just use your imagination and think about it. I'll be right back.
Someday we'll be together.
right, everybody, we back. Now, while you was using your imagination, could you visualize uh, how many tickets do you think will be sold? There's no uh, Michael Jordan. There's no uh, none of them. They're all gone. None of that. They all gone. One no Walter Payton. One no Jim Brown. None of them. It was all gone. How many tickets you think were been sold in? Well, how do you imagine the hoopla would have been going then? Okay, just 6 months now. I want all people who look like me and you to stay out of all restaurants in America. Stay away from all flea markets. Get out of all large and medium retail stores. Get out of baseball. Get out of boxing. Ooh, oh! How many people be jumping up? How many tickets will be sold? What's going? How you think it'll look? Just think about it for a minute. Use your imagination for a minute. Get out of all music and motion pictures. Just walk away from the music industry. Walk away from the motion picture industry. And while you at it, stay out of all pawn shops. Now these are just a few things. I want you to just use your imagination now and see if you man or woman enough to pull some of that off. But before you do, I want you to use your imagination and visualize it first. Okay? Just visualize it. And why should we even do any of that in the first place? What do you think? Now I'm going to run a little quick plug here, but the number to dial into the broadcast is 563-999-3443. Press 1 on your phone if you got something to say. I'm going to go through a few things to see if there's any reason under the sun why we should even imagine something like that. Because, man, I'm going to tell you something. If you are being treated right, if you got equality, if you, see, the way I see it, you can have an all-star basketball player that's making millions of dollars. But how does that affect his nation? Now, I'm not talking about just going to your old neighborhood and refurbishing it. You know, that's a good thing, man. That's fantastic. But why don't we get 25 or 30 more stars like us, and let's do it all over America. After you get it done, then look at your imagination. But let's see if we got any reason under the sun to do anything like this. Let's see. Y'all hold on.
I gotta vote for Trump. I gotta vote for Kamala because my vote's gonna change the world. If you believe that load of trash, you haven't studied 1 ounce of history. Why do people even run for president that know they're not gonna win in the first place? It's a money grab. Why does Bernie Sanders run for president all the time? Now, he knows he got no chance of winning presidency. Why? Because the donations. So if you take in $50 million and you spend $4 million on your campaign effort, and at the end when you lose, which you expected to lose anyway, you get to keep the rest of that money. You're sitting good. You got $46 million. They transferred all that donation money that Biden had straight into Kamala's campaign account. Polly tricks. Both sides are laughing. Not one of these people running for president has addressed the real issues. They can only make fake promises because the presidents are nothing but puppets. They have zero power.
Hundreds of black people were shot. They were burned and beaten to death. Bodies were hung on the lampposts. It was one of the bloodiest purges in American history.
People carry that memory as trauma. And I think one of the most important things we should do is to understand that when people don't want to tell stories, it's not because they want to forget it. It's because they don't want to relive it. Those are two very different things.
Despite what recent reports may have you believe, it was the white people who were rioting. St. Louis was becoming what they call a sundown town, which meant you don't want to be here when the sun goes down. On July 2nd, 1917, a mob of white women, men, and children, yes, children, destroyed and burned down at least $400,000 worth of property. This property belonged to not only black people, but to white families as well. This purge was so brutal and savage that it drove 6,000 black men and women out of their homes. Such a massacre couldn't have happened out of nowhere. Something must have triggered it, right? On July 1st, a day before it all blew up, a rumor started to spread that a black man killed a white man. Tensions were running high. Well, if you are familiar with American history, you are well aware of how white supremacists went above and beyond to subjugate black people. In many cases, they would frame black people for murder just to get it their way. But this story hits a whole other level of crazy.
White mobs moved into the neighborhood, firebombed a lot of the houses, and they would stand around the house and wait for somebody to run out so they could shoot and kill them. You were either shot or you were incinerated. If you were caught on the street, you were lynched. They just rampaged up and down the street, destroying what they could. My grandparents' home, where my father and uncles lived at the time, was destroyed. They had to hide out in a nearby field.
This carnage shocked the nation because it happened soon after U.S. forces entered World War I. So you had black troops leaving their families in April to fight for democracy and make the world a safer place. And then in July, you have black families getting butchered on the streets in the most barbaric ways you can possibly imagine. People were clubbed to death. Children were thrown into flaming houses, and their fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters dangled from a noose. It was a true horror. This is how the Citizen Committee from East St. Louis described the race riot. A very orgy of inhuman butchery during which more than 50 colored men, women, and children were beaten with bludgeons, stoned, shot, drowned, hanged, or burned to death, all without any effective interference on the part of the police, sheriff, or military authorities. This massacre wiped out the black middle class in the area, destroyed many black-owned businesses, and scarred the region for the years to come. Here, you will learn what happened on that fateful day. But first, we have to start from the beginning. At the start of the 20th century, many black Americans migrated from the South to the North and Midwest in search of a better life. The South was worse than you can imagine. There was severe hatred, violence, and racism against black people. Lynchings were common. Beatings and subjugation were widespread. There were 3 bathrooms, men, women, and colored. There were 2 fountains, white and colored. Everything was segregated. White people and black folks couldn't marry, or people would threaten to kill them. A black man wasn't allowed to look like a white man, or a mob would attack him. Black women were often sexually assaulted, but there was nothing they could do about it. But if you think that racism was exclusive to the South, then you would be sadly mistaken. Racism was everywhere, but the North and the Midwest offered better choices for employment and some minor relief from Jim Crow laws. East St. Louis was one of these top destinations. It was here that black people could find work for the railroad, metalworking, and meatpacking companies. It was tedious and hard work, but it put food on the table. The demand for workers in such industries was running high, especially companies that supported the war effort. You see, as the war approached, factories and companies had to produce more ammunition, weapons, and other supplies. Some of these men who lived there left the city to fight in the military. This created a gap and a need for more skilled workers. Good, right? Well, not exactly. Many businesses in East St. Louis recruited black workers from the rural South to come and work for them. They offered to transport them and give them jobs. They were also promised to settle in a community where other black people were building their own lives and opening up businesses. By the spring of 1917, around 2,000 black people arrived in East St. Louis every week. What followed was a series of incidents that set the motion for one of the bloodiest massacres on American soil. There were a couple of factors that played a role here. 1, cultural. 2, political. 3, economic. Let's start with cultural. During the Industrial Revolution, newspapers were mass-produced. They were the biggest, medium, and most commonly used means of altering public opinion. You did not have to be incredibly literate to understand what was going on. The newspaper was designed in such a way that everyone read it, talked about it, and was hooked on it. White people who owned the newspapers and magazines in the area made people think that black Americans were causing chaos in the town and frequently assaulted white people. They downplayed crimes done by white people and invented or exaggerated crimes that involved black people. A lot of residents believed in white supremacy in East St. Louis. In many of these cases, white women were seen as pure and targeted by black men. When you let things like these continue to happen day in and day out, eventually it will sow a seed of hatred. So, how do you make things worse? With politics, of course.
You can't get more of a segregationist than a Woodrow Wilson. You can't get more of a hated person or hatred person with hate in their heart than a Woodrow Wilson. He was the bigot of his time. He didn't try to hide his hatred of African Americans or any person of color. He was the person that did, I think, set back African Americans more than any other person except Abraham Lincoln, who was supposed to free the black folks. But he did more harm to black folks than anybody else in history.
Those at the top believed that black people were brought to East St. Louis to push the Democrats out of office. Look at it this way. When there is an influx of workers that migrate from other areas, the political leaders usually believe that these newcomers will be used in local politics as a strategic move to shift the political power in the city. As more and more black Americans settled, the Democrats felt threatened. That's because black people were beginning to seek representation and influence in the local government and were gaining momentum in challenging the power structure that dominated the area. That's because most of the black Americans at that time supported the Republicans. But if black people were allowed to gain political power and influence, then the Democrats would lose their grip on political control and all the privileges that came with it. So changes had to be made, and fast. The pre-Depression years were extremely good for the people who lived in East St. Louis. The place was booming and many industrialists invested there, especially in steel and iron plants, factories for producing rail equipment, glassworks, and castor oil plants. On top of that, huge industries were planning facilities here for aluminum ore processing, zinc processing, chemicals, you name it. By the early 1890s, it seemed that nothing could stand in the way of East St. Louis and its economy. By 1906, a bunch of rich people invested in opening up their own factories, especially in the automobile industry. This place was so popular that people started calling it the Pittsburgh of the West. Then came the economic problems. Since businesses needed labor, many people from across the United States came here to find work. The city's population went up very quickly. In 1870, about 5,600 people lived here. In 22 years, the number went up to about 25,000. It was the fastest growing city in the U.S. As people flooded the area from every corner, the demographics of the city changed like never before. Most of the incoming population was either immigrants from the South or Europe. In the city's early days, before the industrial boom, not many black people lived here. But by 1910, 1 out of 10 residents were black. By 1917, more than 10,000 black Americans lived here. But there was a problem. There was a growing middle class of black Americans, and white people despised them. This was at a time when black women and men were also competing with white people for jobs, which only added fuel to the fire. In reality, many of the black people who were employed were bought here for cheap labor. Without white money in businesses, crime rates skyrocketed. Violence and corruption were also high. The St. Louis metropolitan area spans across 2 states. It is separated by the Mississippi River, Illinois and Missouri. The Illinois side was always a poor city, but the downtown was pretty active. Many people had businesses here. As the population became primarily black, it damaged the downtown trade. Soon, the east side was overwhelmed with drugs and gangs. It became a political backwater dominated by crime, corruption, and poverty. Democrats blamed the Republicans for colonizing the city with black people so they could get more votes. The businessmen had no choice but to move their businesses to the Missouri side. They built highways to pass over East St. Louis so it would be safe to go over the area. In 1916, the Democrats won for East St. Louis and St. Clair County. But the concept of colonization became so ingrained in the people's minds that they started seeing it as a conspiracy. White people were becoming more and more afraid of East St. Louis becoming another black town. These fears came to life when employers hired black workers to break a strike by white workers. The goal was to weaken the power of the white union members. Here is what happened. In the spring of 1917, a group of white workforce at the aluminum ore company went on strike. The company hired hundreds of black people to take care of it. On May 28, a meeting at the city council was held. The white workers were furious. They filed formal complaints against the black workers. Then, word started to spread that an armed black man attempted to rob a white man. White people lost their minds. They began beating every black person they could find. They went so far as to pull people out of trolleys and streetcars and beat them on the street. The National Guard was called but was dispersed in June. On July 1, a white man with a gun in a Ford shot a couple of black homes. That's when black Americans decided enough was enough. They gathered in a single area, armed, and they opened fire at another coming forward. But what ended up happening was something they never saw coming. The people they killed were two police officers who were headed to investigate the shooting. Now, St. Louis was a ticking time bomb. On July 2nd, all hell broke loose. White people started pouring by the dozens. They beat up the black people with pipes, rocks, and guns. They set fires to any home or business they could find. Anyone who dared to run away at the wrong place and at the wrong time was shot, often at point-blank range. The 3-day crisis had just begun. Here is what Tarhaka Kennedy said about the Exodus. He is the founder of the Committee for Historical Truth, and although he wasn't there to see it, he learned about it because his father, aunts, and uncles lived through it. Thousands of blacks were streaming across that bridge when what they called the race war got into full swing. When that happened, the police shut down the bridge, and no one could escape. Some, in desperation, tried to swim and drowned. It was a manhunt, as if this group of white people were out there to kill for sport, except they didn't care for fair play. All they wanted was to shoot down as many black people as they could find. People were dragged to the streets, and ropes were being put around their necks. If any white man were to protest the lynchings, they would be pushed away by an angry mob. No one could stop the inevitable.
Were there any other stories that they would talk about?
Well, there was the one that I also knew about, and that is that corner around Collinsville Avenue and 4th Street, or down there where the Broadview Hotel is now, or used to be. And I can remember my father pointing out, saying, they hung somebody up there.
Here is an excerpt from a book called Ain't But a Place, an anthology of African American writings about St. Louis. This is a collection of writings from witnesses who experienced the whole thing. These accounts are gruesome, but they are all true. Just a side note, it's not for the faint of heart. It goes like this, and I quote, "Right here I saw the most sickening incident of the evening. To put the rope around a black man's neck, one of the lynchers stuck his fingers inside the gaping scalp and lifted the black man's head by it, literally bathing his hand in the man's blood. A bunch of news articles were published calling it a riot. Many of them depicted the scenes of this exodus. One article explained that the mob used a butcher knife to behead a random black person. We've been brainwashed since birth, but it's time for us to take our power back and realize who we truly are. If you're ready to educate yourself and learn the information they never taught you in school, click the link in our bio to grab our new bundle called Unlock Minds. It includes multiple ebooks breaking down our real history, opens your mind to your true potential, and gives you the blueprint to black power and wealth. Click the link in our description to grab yours now for 80% off before it's too late. Thank you for the support. There was also a 12-year-old black girl who fainted after a bunch of white people pulled her out of a trolley bus. Her mother jumped to help, but the mob turned on her instead, leaving the woman incapacitated with a gaping hole in her head. As Tarhaka Kennedy's family was getting ready for a church service on a Sunday morning, they heard that a white mob was headed their way, and what people call the African Quarter was soon going to be bathed in blood. His grandmother called the rest of the family to hide inside. His father, who was a teenager at the time, together with his uncles, was getting ready to fight. Mind you, some of the people who lived there already had military training. They had just come back from World War I. His uncles and some other young black men used a squirrel rifle and guarded the house. If a white mob were to come anywhere near it, they opened fire. But it wasn't easy. Both the white and black men were armed to the teeth. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours. Many of the surrounding homes and businesses were burned to the ground. By the time morning came, the entire neighborhood was set on fire. Kennedy's family lost their footing. They had no choice but to run to the river for cover in the middle of the night. Here is how Kennedy explained it. According to my uncles, it took 4 hours to get across that river. They fashioned a raft out of old doors and charred wood to cross the Mississippi River and get to the St. Louis side. The raft sprung leaks, but they were able to get across. The sky to the east was red at night for days. They could still hear gunshots and screams. Even to this day, Kennedy's family still has to deal with the trauma. His grandmother passed away a couple of weeks after the Exodus. She died from stress and pneumonia from the river crossing. And if a child were to answer the door, they would be told to look out the window first and stand aside, just in case someone is out there waiting with a gun in their hands. From July 2nd to July 5th, roughly 200 black people were hanged, shot, burned alive, or clubbed to death. The massacre left over $400,000 in property damage. That's almost $9.7 million in today's money. About 6,000 black Americans were forced to leave everything behind. That was more than 50% of East St. Louis's black population. President Theodore Roosevelt condemned the purge. In an article from July 7, 1917, for the New York Times, the president said that the event was an appalling outbreak of savagery. The thing is, you can find a bunch of newspaper articles from that time that call it the East St. Louis race riot. It is sad to think that it took more than 100 years for historians to step in and recognize that murdering hundreds of people over the color of their skin is not a riot, it is genocide. This is a classic example of how capitalism is fully linked with sexism, racism, and imperialism. How easy it is for the media to dramatize, exaggerate, and villainize whoever or whatever they please. It is events such as these that show us the true meaning of why we need to learn about our history. When Russian envoys came to visit New York on July 6, Roosevelt explained that the United States was in no place to criticize Russia for violating human rights, not until the U.S. is ready to ensure justice for all Americans. The leader of the American Federation of Labor, Samuel Gompers, explained that these riots were an organized effort to throw the labor conditions in East St. Louis in complete and utter chaos. Gompers explained that the rioting was understandable, mainly because white workers were losing their jobs and they couldn't compete with the cheap labor. On July 2nd, as darkness came, the National Guard was sent in again, but neither the police officers nor the guardsmen could get the situation under control. Many black residents were still suffering or dying on the streets. Many of the white rioters didn't get arrested. Even though the entire place was swarming with white supremacists, only a handful ever stood trial. Amid all that chaos, many of the rioters tried to suppress the media as much as they could. They smashed cameras and pushed reporters away. For example, Maurice Ahern, Mayor Molman's secretary, gave the order that guardsmen and police officers arrest anyone who photographs the killings and beatings or destroy their cameras. But people still managed to take sneaky pictures and publish them for the world to see. Why do you think they went to such lengths to attack photographers and reporters? Would the fallout have been worse if these historical records were made public? It's safe to say that not every newspaper wanted to spread false narratives. Carlos Hurd was a reporter who used to work for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. In an article published on July 3rd, he said, "For an hour and a half last evening, I saw the massacre of helpless Negroes at Broadway and 4th Street in downtown East St. Louis, where a black skin was a death warrant." Just a couple of days after it all started, Ida B. Wells Barnett, who was a popular journalist at the time, traveled from Chicago to East St. Louis to find out what had happened. She saw something no one dared to publish. After collecting statements from black women who had come back to the city to get their homes or collect whatever was left of their property, they were faced with another cruel reality. In her pamphlet called The East St. Louis Massacre, the greatest outrage of the century, she said the police and the state guards either turned a blind eye to the horrors or even helped the mob attack black people. Now this caused huge problems. The Congress had to investigate it, but the U.S. War Ministry decided it was best to censor the pamphlet because they were terrified it would incite another racial conflict since the country was already at war. It took days before the mob calmed down and the violence began to subside. The NAACP was devastated. They sent Martha Gruning and W.E.B. Du Bois to investigate the Exodus. Together they wrote a report and dubbed it Massacre at East St. Louis. It was later published in the NAACP's magazine, The Crisis. But that was not all. On July 28, the NAACP organized a silent protest in the middle of New York City. About 8,000 to 15,000 black Americans came to show their support. The march started at 57th Street, down 5th Avenue, and ended at 23rd Street. It was the first protest of its kind. The UNIA also responded to the massacre. On July 8, Marcus Garvey issued a statement that said, "This is a crime against the laws of humanity. It is a crime against the laws of the nation. It is a crime against nature, and a crime against the God of all mankind." He also thought that the whole purge was part of a much bigger ploy to harm black Americans who moved up north to find better jobs and live a better life. He called it a bloody farce. After a year had passed, the United States House of Representatives formed a special committee to investigate what the police were doing in the middle of the riot. Investigators discovered that both the police force and the National Guard hadn't done enough to protect black people. They found out that police often ran away from places where the mob was murdering black people or setting things on fire. Some even ditched the station houses and ignored cries for help. A couple of police officers were charged, and that's it. In reality, the investigation sounded like it was blaming the victims. As Marcus Garvey so eloquently puts it, an investigation of the affair resulted in the finding that labor agents had induced Negroes to come from the South. I can hardly see the relevance of such a report with the dragging of men from cars and shooting them. President Roosevelt and Gompers almost came to blows because they disagreed about who should be blamed for the massacre. Roosevelt insisted that the people who caused the violence should be punished and held accountable. Gompers stood up to speak and shared a message he got from the president of the Federation of Labor of Illinois. The message said that the East St. Louis riots weren't caused by labor unions, but by employers bringing black workers from the South to break the back of labor. This pissed the president off. He jumped up and came face to face with Gompers, put his hand on his shoulder and said that there should be no excuse for the atrocities black people had to suffer. Here's the irony. The U.S. just joined World War I and was claiming to promote justice and freedom, and yet here they were, killing their people. Many cartoonists in American newspapers talked about this. East St. Louis wasn't the only city in the North where race riots happened during this time. Some black people started to believe they couldn't rely on white communities or the government, whether in the North or the South. No one was there to protect them. It was time to fight for their rights. Here is a statement from W.E.B. Du Bois that can give you a perfect example of the state of mind of many black Americans who lived during that period. It said, "Today, we raise the terrible weapon of self-defense. When the murderer comes, he shall no longer strike us in the back. When the armed lynchers gather, we too must gather armed. When the mob moves, we propose to meet it with bricks and clubs and guns." Sadly, it had to come to this. Black Americans would no longer be caught unprepared. No matter what was standing in their way, they had to come together and fight against all odds. The cog was now turning. What many of us fail to see is that the racism of the United States history is mainly focused on the South. But when you take a look at all the different cities across the North and Midwest, you will realize that racism is everywhere. You can throw and burn the photographs, but history will always be there. As long as that knowledge gets passed on from generation to generation, it will never be forgotten. It was total madness. Even though this is a dark chapter in American history, it's important to look a little deeper and understand where our ancestors truly came from. Just imagine how many stories like this one are still untold. How many people died that day but were never recorded because their bodies were never recovered. It's important that we educate ourselves, learn from these stories, and make sure to never repeat the same mistakes. What do you think about the East St. Louis massacre? Do you have any stories that your grandparents or parents told you? Anything that you would like to share? As always, thank you for watching and see you in the next video.
Who you marry tells me who you are. When you marry a woman, you don't just marry her. You marry her culture, you marry her community, you marry her people. You understand? So when a black man marries a white woman, he's making several clear points and messages he's sending out to his own people. Because there's no greater symbol of your loyalty to your struggle than to marry a sister who shares that struggle. Black men have married outside their race envy more than the men of all other races in America put together as a percentage. How do you explain that? Is love purely blind? I disagree. Love is a function of your values and your priorities. I would argue the reason black men marry white women is because they wish they were white themselves.
Whoa! Okay, there you have it. Now, let us continue from the book Noble Drew Ali, The Last Prophet. It says here on page 5. Let's see, here we go. He said it will take 50 years to find out what I bought you. And if you are not careful, 50 years after I'm gone, you won't know that I have been here. Children, one day you are going to love me. The biggest fool is the educated fool. Property can only be trained and never educated. The slave mentality, misnomered as Negroes, blacks, and colored people, which include African Americans, is that of an educated fool. This is what he states in this pamphlet here. And what I want to say at this point, after reading this, I need to know what you think about this. Now, I just tried to post this show up there on Facebook, and I was immediately attacked by Facebook that, well, no, you violated our policy. It is amazing to me why people get on Facebook with all kind of foolishness and buffoonery and stupidity and crazy, but it's all good. But as soon as somebody come along with some that will result in change, now we have a problem. You violating the company policy. This kind of stuff that you saying, we don't need to know that that you disrupting the fabric of Facebook. You violating the policy that we have in place and all of this right here. But anyway, let's take a look, regardless of who we say we are, for those of us who have gotten our nationality straight and all that, and I'm going to talk about that, and those who haven't. Let's see what other people say, because, you know, we got people on the inside looking in, and we got people on the outside looking in. So let's see what this man has.
The West let their own people down. I mean, a good example actually is African Americans. I don't know if you can think of a people who were more held back, more deprived, more sabotaged than African Americans. You took everything away from them and took them away from everything. They started in your country at less than zero, literally regarded and treated as subhuman, not allowed to learn to read or write or anything for hundreds of years. But you see, they come from a people of accomplishment to one degree or another, not a people of piracy and theft and appropriation. They come from a people who created and built and developed in their own countries, in their own land. And even though you did everything that you could possibly do to suppress them, to hold them down, to hold them back, and you're still doing that until today, nevertheless, I don't think anyone can dispute the fact that African Americans have become a global cultural superpower. Culturally, they're a superpower. Whatever cultural soft power that America has in the global South, it's African American.
My culture's too lit, too trending, too it, too popular like chopsticks. African American influence the world, cause we the shit. My culture's too lit, it's BA type of influence. The world, but don't stay without blackness, the world is in ruin. Mr. Whitey need us, he or she can't do nothing. That's why they use for rice, cotton, or herbs, healing substance. Okay, let me break this ish down. The gumbo, the beef stew, the lingo is us. Our ancestors built the White House. It's so advanced, we created Star Wars. Abraham Lincoln didn't freed us. Remember the wars? We beat them so bad. Africans and Indians, Fort Moses, Black Seminoles, we beat their ass. Go to the warfare, Stony Rebellions, Black Panther freedom fighters. Ever since we started G was born, they didn't like us. They imitated, try to be like us. That's why we took beatings, degrading, hatred. That's why they tried Jesus Christ us. Being spit on by white supremacy like the Pilgrims took the black Indians' land. Hanging with the noose, being robbed, the New England plan. We never self slavery. Shit, we beat the U.S. Army in the swamp. In school they didn't teach us. Education is so bomb. My culture's too lit, too trending, too it, too popular like chopsticks. African American influence the world, cause we the shit. My culture's too lit, too trending, too it, too popular like chopsticks. African American influence the world, cause we the shit.
What I would like, what I would hope, and what I would advise for the average American citizen, especially if you're from a so-called minority group, you should feel an affiliation and you should feel a solidarity with the people of the Global South. Because your situation is not that different. Your situation is not that different. Their countries in the Global South, whether it's Latin America, Africa, or Asia, or wherever else, the Muslim world, the Arab world, were colonized. You're being colonized now. Your country is being colonized. This is something that I didn't touch upon when I was talking about how private sector power is no longer nationalistic. Now you are up on the chopping block. America is up on the chopping block just like everybody else was, just like the Global South was. And now the roles are going to be reversed. What we've seen through up until now, the relationship between the West and the Global South, or the Global North and the Global South, those roles are going to be reversed in the next century. So your country is up for colonization. It's up for neoliberal colonization, corporate colonization, and you're going to be in the same position that we've been in for all this time. That's already happening, and you can see it already happening. And America is going to get more and more isolated. It's going to get more and more vulnerable because of isolation. You know, we were talking about it on a stream the other day, how geopolitically America is in a very advantageous position because it's got oceans on either side. It's untouchable. But what happens when the rest of the world doesn't want to attack you, but they just don't want anything to do with you? And this is what's going to happen to the United States. And as I say, it is already happening now. So the people in the United States, you need to start having the mindset of the same people in the Global South. You need to start having the same mindset as the people in Niger, the people in Mali, the people in Burkina Faso. You need to have the same mindset as the people in Venezuela. You have to have the same mindset as the people in the EFF in South Africa. You need to have the same mindset as people in the Global South. In other words, those are your brothers and sisters. Those are your compatriots. Those are the people that you should have solidarity with, not with some Democratic Party and not with some Republican Party. Neither one of them cares about you. They serve the interests of the ones who are paying them. So you need to serve, you need to connect yourself and feel a solidarity with people who are going through the same kinds of things as you, and people who have experience going through the kind of things that you're about to go through. You need to connect yourself with the people in Latin America, the people in Africa, the people in the Muslim world, the people in Asia. That's who you need to feel an affiliation with. Stop even thinking about yourself as an American. Stop even thinking about yourself as someone who comes from a so-called country or a so-called civilization. That so-called Western civilization never actually cared about you. So why should you care about it? You should feel an affiliation and a solidarity and a brotherhood and a friendship with people who are in similar conditions as you are, and people who have gone through what you're about to go through, because they can help you if you build those bridges with the Global South. I mean, think about this. Think about, for example, the African American community in the United States. They have what I think they have, the last time I checked, they have something like if they were a country, if the African American community in the United States was a country, they would be richer than Canada. They'd be richer than Australia. They would be a major economy. They have something like $1 trillion, over $1 trillion, maybe it's close to $2 trillion. If the African American community in the United States was a country, they would join BRICS. They would apply to join BRICS, and they would be one of the most influential members of BRICS. So you should start thinking about yourself this way. Think about yourself as a country within a country, and support what the Global South supports. and the global south and the international community, I hate to even use that word because it's been misused to just mean the West. Yeah. The global consensus. Support what the global consensus supports. Support the interests of the global consensus, the countries of the global south, and consider yourself a part of them. And then we can consider you a part of us. We won't connect you with your country because we know anyway. Everyone in the global south knows that you're actually suffering over there. Everyone knows what the situation is for black and brown people and for poor people. Everyone knows that when we talk about the West, we're talking about your governments and we're talking about your powerful people. And we know, but here's the thing though. We know it, but I don't know if you know it. That's the problem. We know this about your situation. We know this about your society, but I don't know the extent to which you actually know it. Because you're still talking about Democrats and Republicans. Like you haven't gotten the memo that you're being colonized. And there's going to be this colonizer or that colonizer. It doesn't matter. Stop thinking in this way. And you need to start thinking as if you are already, your community, already a member of the global south. That you're already a member of the global south. And think in those terms and act in those terms.
All right, everybody, we back. Now, let's go back to your imagination again. We got the churches. Okay, now you know we're all over America with that. But think for a minute. Use your imagination. Okay, you got this big church building. People steady bringing in, they're paying their tithe, they're getting a donation, the pastor and his wife need to go take a vacation, you fund that. The pastor's appreciation day, y'all fund that. And all these different activities inside the church that you fund. You steady funding. Now, when the pastor needs something, he simply assigns a day for you to come in, and so he can express what he needs, and y'all can put the money in the collection plate in order to solve that problem. However, when you need something, and you go to the pastor, they finna, I don't have my rent money in order to pay my rent and stuff, and they're talking about evicting me, and so, well, my son, you know, you got to pray to God. You got to get down on your knees, and you got to seek God's face, and he will provide you with everything you need. Now keep in mind now, when he needs something, he came to you. When you need something, he tell you go to God. But let's check this out. Now you got all these big old church buildings and all that. Inside these buildings, you got a whole lot of rooms, different rooms and stuff. Now these rooms are all square now. Keep in mind, I told you about the 90-degree angles versus the circle, and we done already dealt with that. Why don't you say, well, look, let's do this right here. On Sunday, let's have church. But on Monday, get everybody around here again, because what we're going to do is we're going to start teaching them how to invest in real estate, stock market, offshore accounts, number of investments of money on that day. On Tuesday, get everybody else around here again on Tuesday, and what we're going to do on Tuesday, we ain't going to deal with nothing but real estate. We're going from houses to buildings. On Wednesday, we ain't talking about nothing but local and international investments in banking. We're talking about banking. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then come Wednesday, then we're talking about our ancient story, your culture, relationships, science, nationality, the whole ball of wax. On hump day, right there on Wednesday. On Thursday, when Thursday comes, now we're talking about feeding our nation. We're talking about agriculture. We're talking about growing our own food, proper diet, exercise, nutrition. Come Friday, we'll roll back in and do a summation. Everything that we've learned from Monday through Thursday, we'll get up and we're going to see how many of y'all remember what you done learned, and let's see what we're gonna do. Let's create the plans and the books and write it down so we can execute judgment on the next week. Now we do this here on Friday until the sun go down. Sun go down, now you can rest and go and take care of your family and do everything that you got to do, because come Sunday, since this is the way y'all do it, then we have church again and we repeat the process. How that sound? What you think about that? The way I see it, now this is just me. This is the way I see it. I don't talk about the prophet every day, all day long. I'm not talking about what he said every day, because I'm too busy doing what he say do. That's just me. Now we're going to the next plug. Y'all hold on a minute.
Prophet Noble Drew Ali is one of the greatest inspirational human beings in this century. Now we have to consider what the prophecies mean. The prophecies mean a continuation of information since the beginning of time. This is one of many ways we know that Noble Drew Ali is Allah's prophet, because he has brought us and the entire world a saving power, the everlasting gospel to ensure us that man will win, that man is from the everlasting past to the never-ending days to come, and that there's no failure for him, frankly. There's no failure for man. There's so many things that we'd like to know about the Prophet Noble Drew Ali's life that, from what I understand, he says it's not really necessary. Prophet Noble Drew Ali is known as Prophet Noble Drew Ali. However, there are some recent information that people have dug up on the internet talking about the Prophet, saying that his name was something else, saying that he was not born in North Carolina, he was born in Virginia. Some people say that he was 16 years old and he was thrown in the fire, and his aunt threw him in the fire and he got out of the fire. But these are all things, pieces of information that I can't stand on. But what I do know, and what we all should know and recognize, is that he never called himself anything other than, in our literature, Noble Drew Ali. And irregardless of what you might have, those out there who might have said his name was this and it was that, but he asked us in his 101 questions and answers, who is Noble Drew Ali? And the answer is he's Allah's prophet. So we refer to him by what he referred to himself as, Noble Drew Ali, the last prophet in these days. Now we have to consider what the prophecies mean. And we as a people are getting, we're getting educated to what prophecy really means. A prophetic. The prophecies mean a continuation of information since the beginning of time. All prophets, especially the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, carries what we call the everlasting gospel with them, which is a saving power. And that everlasting gospel came with first physical man. First physical man was guaranteed that saving power, the everlasting gospel. In fact, the avenue that we get it from is from Allah, by our father, not our fathers, but our father, first physical man, and by his prophet. This is one of many ways we know that Noble Drew Ali is Allah's prophet, because he has brought us and the entire world a saving power, the everlasting gospel to assure us that man will win, that man is from the everlasting past to the never-ending days to come, and that there's no failure for him, frankly. There's no failure for man. This we've been assured of when we go this way. Our prophet Noble Drew Ali, the writing that he gave us, the information, the divine instructions that he gave us, has helped us, many of us, tremendously. Even my ophthalmologist, who is from Syria, and we've been together for 3 years now. He's amazed when I come to the office to get my eyes checked routinely. In fact, I gave him the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. I gave him the Prophet's Questionnaire and the Divine Constitution, and he loves it. He says, every time you come, I feel so good. He said, the last time I was there, he says, let me put you on my Instagram and tell the people who you are. Tell them what you're teaching. And he tells all of his friends, he says, he's a Moorish American, and he is teaching these people who they are. And he is embracing Islam, our religion. He's supposed to do that. And the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, not sidetracking anything of that sort, but he says, they are helping me. Why not you? It is your problem. Many people are helping the Prophet Noble Drew Ali because he's bringing good tidings. Our Prophet Noble Drew Ali instills into each and every one of us, those who agreed to follow him in his teachings, to be better, better husbands, better wives, better children, better aunts and uncles, better people. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, the prophet is worthy of his hire. Our prophet Noble Drew Ali is worthy of his hire. And you ask, well, who hired him? Allah hired him, the great God of the universe. And he has done and is still doing his job in helping us to feel better about ourselves and uplifting fallen humanity. Our prophet Noble Drew Ali is an example, both mentally, physically, and spiritually, of what we can be. Even when you look at photographs of him, he's always dressed immaculately. He's dressed to represent himself in a manner that you say, oh, this is somebody we should pay attention to. He also emphasized that you can be religious and rich. Contrary to the concept of, oh, I'm pious and I'm religious and I'm so poor. No. That's a myth that was created during the time of the prophet Jesus being born. Oh, he was born in a manger. That was the closest place he could get to. But he was born rich, and that's another story because he was out of the house of David, and David was rich. But our prophet Noble Drew Ali brought us also the medicine, the herbal medicine to help us heal these bodies that we still have today. And it's produced by a wonderful, strong family, the McElrath Bay family, who I admire greatly for keeping up the Prophet's medicine. He brought us the Moorish bath compound that's multi-useful. And he says the instructions on the bath compound, you can brush your teeth with it, you can wash your face with it, you can take a bath with it. And we use those instruments today, those medicines. He brought us the Moorish bodybuilder and blood purifier, the herbal tea that cleans your system out immaculately. You know, in Ayurvedic medicine and Indian medicine, There are different tastes that does things for the body, the sweet, the sour. But in Ayurvedic medicine, the bitter taste, the bitter taste is the taste that stimulates the mind immensely. Most people need to be aware of that. And that tea is so bitter that it will make you make a face that you don't want everybody to see. But it stimulates the mind and it cleans your system. It's a blood purifier. He brought those medicines to us, and it tells us on the box what it does for you. All herbs. He brought us the Moorish mineral oil. You need minerals to keep your body mucho fuerte, in Spanish, very strong. And that mineral healing oil is also multi-useful. To rub your knee if it's hurting, or drink it to put the minerals back in your body. And what we do in Chicago, we make Moorish water. So we boil our water, we put drops of the oil in the water, put it in the refrigerator, and when you come back, say, Islam, boy. Well, come on in, brother. Come in, sister. How about a glass of Moorish water? And you get a nice cool glass of water with the mineral oil in there, and to satisfy your palate and give your body a boost of immunology, a boost of vitamins and minerals that we need to carry on. So his approach to uplift and fall humanity was multidimensional, and it is to this very day. And we can talk about the Prophet Noble Ali over and over again, but to us, he is Allah's prophet. Now, many people say, well, on that note, oh, he's not a prophet. He's just a good man. Well, to us, he's our prophet. That's one of the questions and answers, and our question is, what is our prophet to us? He is an angel of Allah sent to bring us the everlasting gospel of Allah, as all prophets do. So you can say what you want to say about our Prophet Noble Ali, but just don't be vigorous about it with us, because we will correct you or we will walk away. Because to us, the Moorish American Muslims, he is our prophet, and we respect the prophecy. He has explained to us that there are five prophets that we are supposed to look at. Divine prophets, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, and Confucius, of course himself. And we do that. And these prophets are prophets all over the world in Asiatic communities. Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, and Confucius are very popular in different Asiatic settings or communities all around the world. And all of them have something to say in terms of the everlasting gospel, a saving power that we need to save ourselves.
This series and many others can only be found exclusively on Amexa. Quickly sign up with our 3-step process to get started. The link to access your trial is in the description below. We'll see you in the next chapter. Peace and love.
Okay, everybody, we're back. Now let's go on to the next thing, and I'm still coming to you from the book, Noble Drew Ali, The Last Prophet. He states down here the following: Moors, stay out of the alley with your turbulent fezzes on during these days. Many Moorish would put on their headdresses of freedom, turbans and fezzes on their heads, but had Negro thought patterns in their heads. They would frequent bars, dives, and alleyways as though they had brimmed hats and cups on their heads. Carry your fez to the temple to keep the public from knowing of their doings unbecoming of a free person. The Holy Prophet called out this executive order. It is to stand until the Moorish know how to act like a redeemed people. Now to me, that's very, very important. And those people who know me, when you see me with my fez on, it's serious, brother. I don't care where you see me in America. If you ever see me with it on, it is serious. And man, I ain't playing. Now, I have something here I want to run by you all that was given to me a long time ago. Reads as follows. Set for the defense of the God spell. This is to certify that after satisfactory relation of the infinite experience, a call to the national ministry of the Moorish American national government, Dr. Tarhaka Amana El Bey, divine minister, on the 13th day of the month of January in the year 2012, education and truth. The aforementioned official, now ordained to the divine ministry, is empowered to teach the high principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Teach all men and nations of the earth to obey the laws and national constitution of the said government. He is authorized to be an ambassador to their special cabinet and to seek national friendship, global alliances, and treaties of harmony to the benefit of humanity. All ministers representing Moorish America must confirm themselves to the holy books and laws of salvation and to heal the bodies, souls, and hearts of man that they may learn to live instead. Okay, now I'm not going to read all of it, but this is coming from what was given to me. I didn't know anything about the Moors until one day I got a call on the telephone. I answered the call, and they said, "We've been watching you. We want you to come and so we can talk to you. And we're going to send you $1,000 down there and catch a plane or train or however you want to come on up here." And so I did, and I went up there, spent 3 days up there, and then I came on back. But nevertheless, I'm doing the same thing that I was always doing, and that is trying to teach and liberate my people, and that is what I do. But let's go over here and deal with let's see what we got here now. Let's deal with a little bit of more science. Let's deal with it.
So the Moorish Science Temple as a movement is revolutionary given the time that it's existing and is spreading these teachings at a time when you couldn't get this information easily. And now, even 50 years later, 40 years later, many of the things that are conveyed in the teachings of Moorish science, like aspects of what we would recognize as Gnostic teachings, the Prophet had conveyed this in the Moorish Quran openly 40 years earlier. Theologians at Princeton are not gaining access to it until the 1950s and 60s. And I mean gaining, meaning openly like that. Where now those who are studying Christian theology are finding out about the Gnostics in more, in fuller ways, with more depth, as opposed to just hearing about the Gnostics and saying they were a heretical group and then just kept it moving, right? So that's a fairly recent phenomenon in theology where people are now openly talking about these early Gnostic traditions and groups like the Adoptionists and the Ebionites and others. And yet, this is something that's being conveyed to the African American, if you will, population in urban centers in Chicago and in New York and in areas anyway of Virginia and throughout the country, Richmond and other places where temples in Michigan, Detroit, at a time when the average person wouldn't have had access to this. So that's very significant. So, and all that was intended to give people the foundation of self-knowledge. Know thyself and thy Father God, Allah. And then, which is in the opening of the Moorish Quran. As I said before when I quoted Ali Mazrui, the political scientist, he said that, blacks are the only ethnic group that's defined by a racial term. The idea of, quote-unquote white people, we understand that you then attach that to different nationalities. People use the collective term of white. But then they'll tell you German, Italian, French, what have you. In fact, one of my friends who passed away, Brother Ricardo Williamson Bay, who was from North Philly, he used to say when he first got involved in the Moorish Science Temple in the 70s, because he was older than I and got involved earlier, he said one of his questions, if somebody said to him, what do you mean I ain't black? He said, well, what makes you black? And he said, I'm black because I'm black. He said, no, define for me what that means. I'm just asking, tell me what that means. And he said, what do you mean? It just means I'm black. Look at me, I'm black. I said, I'm looking at you and I see a Moor, right? Or I'm looking at you and I see somebody who's of African ancestry. But why are you calling yourself black? And if they couldn't answer it, he would just say, well, look, I'm just leaving you with that thought. In other words, if I stay here and just we're going to go back and forth because you're not hearing me, or you're hearing me, but you're not listening to me. So I'm just basically trying to beat down a brick wall at this point with a feather. So let me just let it go, but I'm going to leave you with this question. Why are you black? Meaning, more specifically, why do you use the term black to refer to yourself? To which I then added, I said, well, that's deep, brother. I said, because my response was to say to people what you heard me say a number of times. Why do you call yourself black and Mr. Choi or Mrs. Nakazawa don't call themselves yellow? Huh? I said, you understand? I said, who was that? I said, what would you call that person? And I point to someone who was European. So were they white? Nakazawa. Japanese, right? Choi. Could be Chinese or maybe Korean, right? But I said, they don't call themselves yellow. I'm simply asking you to ask yourself why they don't call themselves by color names and you do. And that's it. And then I just keep it moving. Because if they're committed to waking up, they'll eventually figure it out. That's what they will do. That's a good question. Right. If not, they'll go back to sleep, or they'll go back to being, if you will, inundated by distractions, what I call weapons of mass distraction, right? The weapons of mass distraction, which keep people from pausing long enough to really think about the world they're in and how they're interacting with it. By asking folks to question why they were called blacks, Negroes, and colored people, Drew Ali was simultaneously raising the question of why predominantly European persons were known as whites. Now, he's doing this in the mid-1920s when the movement, is essentially taken off as Moorish science. But you're talking about 1926 to 1929, maybe 1925. So you're talking about in that time frame where he's emphasizing more. The search for such answers would inevitably reveal that historically, white was more of a caste, and caste meaning a place in the social structure. Where are you on the hierarchy? Like I said before, in terms of in India or the Brahmin Hindu caste system, white was more of a caste than an individual race or phenotype. But the sporadic, lengthy, and clearly ingenious process of creating that caste did culminate in a kind of Brahmanizing of the Anglo phenotype. And then I point out that's an issue that I later go into more detail and analyze.
This series and many others can only be found exclusively on Amexo. Quickly sign up with our 3-step process to get started. The link to access your trial is in the description below. We'll see you in the next chapter. Peace and love.
We back now. Before we go back to the book, and we are going back to the book, but let's deal with race in America one more time, okay? Y'all hold on a minute, and we'll be back.
If you ask the average sister or brother why they're not black, or why you don't, or why they shouldn't call themselves black, they would be lost unless they were willing to sit down and listen for a while to the rationale for where this comes from. Like I said, understanding systems of oppression is key to being able to resist oppression. If you don't understand what the motivation was for putting that into place in the first place, you don't know how to deal with it. And if you want to, like I said, if you want to speak of we as highly melanated people, or we as NUC, or we as I would say, people of predominant African ancestry, that makes more sense to me. I'm just saying. So when I looked at what Drew Ali was trying to convey, and did convey, obviously, to those who heard what he was saying, back in the early teens and 1920s in particular, that you are not black, you are not Negro, you are not colored. Just on a psychological level, I can see the value. I haven't even gotten into what the value and importance of what he was saying by having folks reject calling themselves Negro, black, or colored, because that's a whole nother issue. I just got into the psychology of it, right? So the value of not identifying with black is it compels you to be more specific in identifying culture, knowing your geographic origin, knowing your history. Yet, again, more is a reference to a people, to an empire that covered a geographical location. The Moorish Empire at one time was from the northwestern part of the Maghreb or North Africa all the way down to the Senegal River and as far east as the border of Egypt. That's part of what, and I'm just talking about what we know as the recognized Moorish Empire in terms of international and diplomatic history and relations. So we can say that covers a wide swath of the African continent. That would include Africans of various hues, people who would be darker in complexion and others who'd be lighter in complexion. And the primary sources from Duarte, Portuguese travelers, and Azrara and English sources all affirm that the term Moor was used for people of African ancestry. Later, the term blackamoor is introduced, but it's part of the development of the kind of pigmentocracy direction that exists. And even in the medieval period, when the Templars referred to living a good life as a pure and white life, which meant they were supposed to be honorable men, which meant they were supposed to respect life and live as Christ had instructed as far as they understood it. But that was the phrase, a pure and white life. So they're using a term for themselves that's meant to affirm and empower. Because like I said before, in referencing, Biko versus the judge, he said, you're more pink than white. So why do you call yourselves white? Well, because white is a lot more culturally affirming of our power, our divinity, our superiority than calling ourselves pink. Seeing the importance of a name, right? Names, words have power. The ancient Kemetic principle of nomo, the power of the spoken word. These are things that I also was exposed to in Africa-centered circles, which is why it was so odd for me that I had people trying to affirm blackness or black. To me, like I said, there's something else going on. So I say again, other folks are not calling themselves yellow Americans. There's no yellow power. There's no yellow consciousness. And those groups of people who are Asian, of different nationalities, they have tended to do pretty well, even in the face of what we know as so-called global white supremacy, right? And yes, I know that they know more about themselves. Their culture's more intact. I agree. That's exactly why I'm telling you, figure out what your culture is so you can spread it and make it more influential within your community. We're talking about Africans or Moors who were simply subjugated and oppressed and suffering from amnesia, right? So if you call yourself a Negro and you don't see any value in yourself and you believe in the inherent superiority of this new system that you're in, I'm talking about in the context from the 18th through the 20th centuries, I dare say even into the 21st century, then that means you don't see the value of who you are, which means you don't know who you are, which means you don't know your history, which means you have amnesia. The Austrian cartoonist Volk does this image showing Lincoln, as he says, under the veil, as if he was saying, I'm revealing who this person actually is. What made this different from the usual caricatures of Lincoln, some caricatures that could be seen in things like Harper's, which was a dominant journal during the time, would show him almost looking buffoonish or like an ape and things that were very derogatory. But Volk's Under the Veil was not really anything that was offensive in terms of his phenotype. He just looked like a Moor wearing Moorish attire. So that got my attention because it made me ask the question, did Volk, as a European immigrant, also know that Moors were clearly an African people, but also did he know something about these links to Lincoln's own family? And I might even add, recently there was a historian, I forget their name, but they gave a presentation where they talked about Lincoln's work with something known as the William Dungy case in 1855. And that William Dungy case was where Dungy in the state of Illinois was found to have gotten in trouble with people in the society who accused him of not being quote-unquote white. And they were arguing that he was a Negro. Lincoln defended him and argued that he was of Moorish ancestry. So that's another element of American history that's often overlooked. Now, why wouldn't people look more deeply at why Adalbert Volk did this? In fact, Volk had to flee the country in part because of his Confederate sympathies, but he came back in 1864, at least according to what Rufus Wilson says, and then produced a collection of his caricatures, but mysteriously didn't include this original one of Under the Veil showing Lincoln looking Moorish. So, you know, part of what this suggests to me is there clearly were Europeans, European Americans in the United States in the 19th century who were still fully aware of some Moorish aspect to the history of not just the United States, but the colonies which had preceded it. I didn't go into this saying, you know, I got to prove Moorish science right. I went into it from the start going, I'm not sure. But then as I kept saying, I said, wait a minute. Ancient Kemet, the prophet's talking about Kemet. We got several chapters in the Moorish Quran reference. Why is Kemet what's the Gnostics? And what is the Gnostics are saying things similar. The Marabouts, the Murids. So I'm like, wait a minute. Then Ivan Van Sertima, they came before, wait a minute. We were here in the Americas. All this is contained in Moorish science, right? So then I said, that's deep. And then to go into the diplomatic history and the legal history, and I'm going, this is real. What's so frustrating for me, as you can imagine, is that I wish more of us knew about it, even those who are affiliated with temples. The reason why I wrote the book is because and even the style of it, because I've even had my colleagues come and say, why do you have so many sections that have bold, you know, and then you italicize? I said, understand, I didn't write this book for you or I, meaning the average academic. I wrote this book for those within the Moorish American community and the larger African American community. I even say the larger quote-unquote Latino or Asiatic Spanish-speaking community, so that we could look at it and the bold things are meant to stand out. So you can really emphasize that and certain things that I highlighted, because I know essentially how most people read if they're part of, people say, the rank and file. And yet I had to produce something that was chock full of primary and secondary sources from reputable scholars, that was in one locale. The term Moor or Morans or Mores is used to refer to what we would say are so-called black people, what is more accurately African people, particularly African people of a darker olive complexion, but it can vary. In fact, when Leo Africanus, who was a Moor taken captive and then converted to Catholicism and then wrote a book about the history of the Moors, and he basically says the proper name for what people were calling Ethiops or Ethiopians or so-called Negroes was Moor. ancestry. That's why the word Moor is so pervasive in so many languages. French, it's Mur. As I already said, Germanic languages, it's Moor, M-O-H-R. And in part, people say it's because of the association with the Roman, the Latin mores. But then the Greek preceded it, the Mavros, or Moros. But as I said already, its origins are most certainly in Africa, so it was an indigenous term. The reason why the transition occurs is because as the Moors lose power, those European forces that are taking over see the need to start to denigrate, and I use that word intentionally, and devalue the African person, the African woman and man in history, in order to justify the new conditions. The new conditions, and now Europe is in ascension. Plus, I dare say, it also has to do with what then emerges with something known as the law of nations, because theories around nationality and what that means and the law of nations and then treaties comes into play. So you have people of European Christian ancestry saying, we have to emphasize now our greatness by devaluing the African. That's a part of it, and not all, but I would venture to say most who are in positions of power start to adopt that view. Then the second thing that they do is they understand that since we're talking about nations and the law, if we recognize you as a nation under the sacred treaties, in fact, Emmerich de Vattel, who was recognized as having talked about the law of nations and the sacredness of treaties, said nations should respect other nations. But if you create a situation where folks are under the law made into non-persons, then what you're doing is creating a condition for their legal oppression. Now, it ain't right. Don't get me wrong. It ain't right. I'm not just because people will try to say, well, but so you're saying the legal. I'm not saying that that doing that is justified, because it's still immoral. You're still oppressing and abusing a people. But what I'm explaining is how the law works within that context.
This series and many others can only be found exclusively on Amexa. Quickly sign up with our 3-step process to get started. The link to access your trial is in the description below. We'll see you in the next chapter. Peace and love.
Okay, everybody, we back now. We've dealt with the Moorish science. I told you what that was, and now we're on your nationality and why it is so important for you to acknowledge your nationality. Now, I read to you what the prophet said right here. I'll read it again, and I hope you didn't miss it. I hope you didn't miss it. Well, he said, let me find it one more time. Where was? Okay, well, let's go here. By you being born here doesn't make you a citizen. Negroes, blacks, and colored people are names given to slaves during the time of slavery. Those born under the powers of the 14th and 15th Amendments are not true citizens, but are declared persons, commercial property. Now I'm going to stop right there, because, you know, I deal with contract law, ancient story, all different angles of law and stuff. Now, you don't have the chains and shackles on your feet, but you are still being regarded as property because you're being regarded as persons. So what I have to tell you to do is contact me. We show you how to get out of that right there, and then we can get on over into your proper status, free national, but at the same time know how to function and operate when they come up against you with the laws, or what they call them laws. They're not no laws, it's garbage actually. Y'all on a minute. Let me make sure I got this one right also. Someone tells you that you must pay them money about your children in the form of child support. They also say they would suspend your driver's license. And they said they would garnish your wages. Who were they talking to? A debtor? Or did they make the mistake and say it to a creditor? When you got married, they said it was a part of that also. Request my free report at TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Let's have some fun. Fill out the contact us form for my free report, and I'll rush it straight to your email box. What about this banking stuff? What's going on in the United States? I tell you what, request my free report at TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Peace.
Immigrant people of this land. Our rights are inalienable, protected, guaranteed, and secured by the state constitution, the Constitution of the United States of America, international treaties, and private and public international law.
I know today we can reach a new objective, come together for a good cause and share the same perspective. Staring at a face with 12 numbers in 2 hands. Now is the time that I tell you where I stand. Most of you don't see the forest for the trees, hurt by the harsh reality. Now I gotta leave, we should have no need.
Welcome to Moorish American, One Supreme Issue. I am Sheikah Deanna L. And in the studio today I have 2 guests, Grand National Grand Sheikh Kenyu Umar Bey, Islam Grand Sheikh, and also Sheikh Laville, Islam Grand Sheikh. Thank you all for joining us today. I have a speech at the end of time written by Prophet Noble Drew Ali. I'd like to read an excerpt from it. But if you have the true love of Allah and the spirit of your forefathers, you fear not what you hear and see. Grand Sheikh, we're clear about the Republican form of government being set up by our people, by the people, for the people. Let's talk about what occurred to that Republican form of government. In school, I can remember hearing, I can hear it today, 9 years of I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands. And then let's not forget the song, Oh Say Can You See, the Star Spangled Banner.
Right.
Whatever happened, Grand Sheikh, to that Republican form of government?
Well, when the people were dumbed down to who they were and the significance of their authority as a government, a democracy was produced, an illusion to make them think this represented the people, where those who were in power began to use the public as subjects for their idle ideas. So the republic, which represents the people, which represents the pristine beauty of freedom, became an illusion.
Islam. Sheikh Laville, would you like to add anything to that? I agree.
First, I rise giving praises to Allah, the governor, cherisher, sustainer, ruler of the worlds. I'd like to give hail and honors to the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, who came in these last days, bringing us our nationality, kicking over the tombstones of Negro, black, and colored, and standing us up on a perpendicular square. Islam, in fact, we were
The United States Constitution, which the Prophet Noble Drew Ali refers to as one of the greatest documents of all time, in Article 6, Section 4, it makes a reference and guarantees a republic form of government, which is basically, like you said before, a government by the people and for the people, not set up as some elitist form or elitist entity where those who would be the servants of the people are deemed to be the masters and they rule over the people instead of serving the people.
That's right.
Islam.
Islam.
We understand money don't make the man. It is free national standards and power that make a man and a nation. The wealth of all national governments, gold, silver, and commerce belongs to the people, and the people alone. Which brings me to my next question. Should the USA be put on trial for the media block imposed against Moorish Americans and denying Moorish children their right to their nationality, which is a violation of international law? Now, and I'd like to add something to that as well, because the Prophet talked about their free national name. He stated, through your free national name, you are known and recognized by all nations of the earth that are recognized by said national government in which they live. He talked about the 14th and 15th Amendment, Grand Sheikh, being brought by the North and the South in unit, placing the Southerner, which was at that. Now I want to get this right, because these are the Prophet's words, so I want to read them verbatim so that we don't make no mistakes. The Prophet said, through your free national name, you are known and recognized by all nations of the earth that are recognized by said national governments in which they live. The 14th and 15th Amendments brought the North and South in unit, placing the Southerner, which was at that time without power, with the constitutional body of power. Now, once again, should the USA be put on trial for that international law that's being broken and the children not being revealed their true identity?
Well, first of all, it is our responsibility to see to it that our nationality is represented to the fullest, because every nation is supposed to worship at their own vine and fig tree. I'm sure that the United States government bears some responsibility, but the burden ultimately falls on us.
Yes.
Islam.
Yes, Islam, right. We do have schools. And because of the schools, Grand Sheikh, that we have, and our children are predominantly in the schools that are being controlled by the government today, I'd like to pose that same question to you, Grand Sheikh.
Islam, praise and honor to his prophet. I'm in conjunction with the Sheikh Mo. First of all, the Moors dropped the ball after our prophet went behind the veil. It was solely upon us to take the Moorish Science Temple of America and create a school that would compensate for what the Asiatics wasn't being taught in public schools. We didn't do that. The European, according to the 14th, 15th Amendment, is a granted privilege. We don't need that implication, because according to 1776, everybody's free and has unalienable rights. However, the Europeans is subject to his own problems. We are a nation within a nation. It is time for the Moors to stand upright, independent, and fearless, and take their place in the affairs of men as a nation. I want to say one thing. That does not mean that the Europeans are not a conspirator to hide the birthright of the Moors, because the prophet in the divine warning to the nation, he asked everybody to get up under their own vine and fig tree from a free national standard.
Absolutely. So, Grand Sheikh, are you saying that the responsibility shouldn't fall upon the government, since our children are presently now in their schools?
We are our own government, and we should come together and do what the Holy Prophet Noble Drew Ali instructs us to do, to take our place in the affairs of men as a nation, and to not amalgamate or straight after the gods of Europe who we know nothing of. His job is to support, as any other nation that's civilized, any other nation to help them back into the constitutional fold of government. That's the only thing that we can direct toward the European or any other nation.
I agree. So at this point, our focus should be mainly on making sure that our schools, and all praises due to Allah, we do have a school that's being built fresh from the ground here in Moorish Mecca. I am so happy. Thank you both. I'd like to talking about that one supreme issue. Speaking of the one supreme issue, the Prophet also spoke about the one supreme issue in the divine warning. I'd like to read a capture. So there isn't but one supreme issue for my people to use to redeem that which was lost, and that is through the above statements. Then the lion and the lamb can lie down together in yonder hills, and neither will be harmed, because love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice will be reigning out in this land in those days. The United States will be one of the greatest civilized and prosperous governments of the world. But if the above principles are not carried out by the citizens and my people in this government, the worst is yet to come. Because the great God of the universe is not pleased with the works that are being performed in North America by my people. And this great sin must be removed from the land to save it from enormous earthquakes, diseases, etc. Now, what action must be taken, Grand Sheikh, to bring the indigenous people out of this crippled, dependent state that we are presently in? And also, to add to that, the state that allows the corporate industrial complex to flourish off the masses of the people. How does that one supreme issue, Grand Sheikh, factor into our economic future as far as securing it?
Okay. Now, we're moving right on down now. We got some more. I want to state how I seen it when the Moors went into Spain. Now, if you look back to your ancient story, and when you deal with one nation invading another nation, the way I see it is, this is the way I see it. The Moors went into Spain, they were magnificent. But the only thing that I say they didn't do that they should have did is when they was going into Spain, they should have had their women and children prepared and ready to come in there with them. Otherwise, when you went in there, the only thing that you won't be able to procreate with is somebody that wasn't under you. Now, if that was the case when you went in there, the first chance you got after you got everything under control, yep, we got to go get the women and children, our own women and children that look like us, and bring us in there. And now we're ready to rock and roll. And then we could be loyal to each other and see how things are going to go. Let's bring in the history professor.
If you ask an Asian person, are they yellow or are they brown? Would the person say to you, oh, well, yes, I am yellow? Or would they say, well, what do you mean? Say, well, oh, you mean, well, yeah. The average Asian, I would venture to say, average Chinese, average Japanese or Korean would probably say, I'm Asian, or I'm from Korea, or I'm from Japan, or I'm from China or Vietnam or whatever, they would not use the term yellow. I'm still trying to figure out why so many of our people are so hell-bent on using the term black, given to us by Europeans, even though people will say, yeah, but it was meant to be negative. So you're going to make a negative into a positive. So by that logic, let's do that with everything. So by that logic, let's do that with everything. So let's make the word idiot mean genius. In other words, I'm trying to figure out what is the benefit of that. It is their language in that it has a lot more implicit bias, culturally imposed, a lot more mind bugs. And again, it's not what our ancestors would have called themselves in their own language. This is what especially for those who are arguing that they're being Africa-centered or Afrocentric. If we're being Africa-centered, use a term that has its roots in Africa, not the term black that was given to us by Europeans at a period in their history where they're ascending and using it to devalue us. I'm completely at a loss for that. So when I think about when Malcolm, one of our heroes, one of our saints, if you will, said, if a cat has kittens in an oven, are they biscuits? So when people will tell me, well, they're not African because they live in America or the United States, this democratic republic, and I say, well, you are still of African ancestry. And coming from a strict, if you will, Africa-centered view, especially in, one of my professors and one of my mentors is Dr. Molefi Asante and the whole foundation of Afrocentricity, etc., right? And clearly he was trying to get us as students, he said, to recognize that we are of African ancestry, we are Africans, even if we're not on the continent. That's the attitude you have to have, that you're part of the diaspora. Now, it doesn't mean you're identical to a sister or brother who's Nigerian. It doesn't mean you're identical to a sister or brother who's from Kenya or Togo or whatever part of the African continent. Don't get me wrong. I embrace it. I used to tell my students when I first started teaching, they would make fun of some students who were darker in hue. And I used to tell my students, I wish I was that complexion. And the students look at me going, wait a minute, why would you want to look like this person who's so black, so dark? And I said, because I know who they are, because I know their value. The problem is you don't. And they're looking to me as a young teacher and going, well, wait a minute now, this young teacher, why would he want to affirm that, right? So clearly my aversion was not to saying I'm of African ancestry or that I have an aversion to being dark in complexion. My aversion is to the word black. It's not, I don't have a problem with somebody saying, well, man, you ain't nothing but you're African in America. My father, who was born in Cuba, identified himself as an Afro-Cuban. My father, who was a little slightly darker than I in hue, emphasized his pride in his African roots, his African ancestry. And my grandmother, who was darker in complexion as well, of a darker olive hue. So what I'm saying is, there's no problem with hue. It's not a problem with it's not about complexion. And it damn sure isn't about me thinking we have no history. Because needless to say, I could easily dispense with the average person talking about their knowledge of African history who makes the same argument. What I'm saying is someone who is telling you, well, then you're negating your being, negating yourself. That's self-hatred. And then I say, well, wait a minute. I don't hate the fact that I'm descendant of the ancient Kemites. I'm not hating the fact that my ancestry is connected to the people within the Moorish Empire or ancient Carthage or the peoples of Mali or the ancient Congo or Angola. I said, where do you want to go? The Nok culture? I mean, come on, right? I know who, I can tell you about Europeans worshiping Africans. Saint Moritz or Saint Maurice, who was an African saint in the early Catholic Church, right? So, or the so-called, not so-called because they're known by this theologically, the Black Madonnas, right? Now that's the term that's used in the, say I have an aversion to using the term black for myself and for us as a collective, but in Western art history, theological art history, that's the phrase that they use. So I'm just using their term. From the African perspective, you would just say they're Madonnas, or the images of Mariam and Isa, or Jesus, right? That's it. But again, the pigmentocratic values that have infused so much of the European or Western world is what has us thinking in terms of black and white. And the irony is, again, the whole culture, specifically the United States, is kind of predicated on it. That's why you have a lot of Asian sisters and brothers who will say, you know, we're almost invisible because the issue in America is largely black versus white. We're just kind of in the margins. I've heard folks say that. You know, we're here too. We have a history. We have a culture. But the irony is that relative invisibility, historically speaking, right? That's changing now with the rise of, clearly, of China. But was largely allowing folks in, say, the Chinese American community to continue to build, to network, and to strengthen their communities, and to do well under some very oppressive conditions at times, right? Because the Chinese also at one time were prevented from immigrating, immigrating to the United States, the Chinese Exclusion Act, until it was repealed, I think after about 3 decades. But there was a long period of time when they couldn't become citizens because of a fear of China's presence. In fact, part of what people talk about the yellow peril, that was a term from those days. The yellow peril was what they said. They were afraid the Chinese were too foreign to be absorbed into U.S. culture, Americana. But what it was straight up racism against this Asian community, the Chinese. But here's the key. Even though the mainstream media was often calling them the yellow peril, they didn't continue to call themselves yellows. So I'm trying to figure out why folks are still, you know, trying to hold on to black. Here's my guess. The people very often who will tell you you're the one, because I've heard the same thing, and they come after me too at times saying based on my complexion too, because make an assumption. And I say, look, I just told you I've dedicated my entire professional life to uncovering and to teaching the legacy of African people, our contributions to the world, right? That's I was disciplined and dedicated enough to make that my mission. As the French might say, my raison d'être, my reason for being, or d'être, reason for being. But this idea of saying, you're doing that because you're self-hating, I turn it around and say, I think you don't want to call yourself African because you're not comfortable with being of African ancestry. You somehow think black gives you an out. Why? Because your image of Africa is still pejorative, and you won't admit it, because you still have contempt for many sisters and brothers who are from Africa. That's what I think. And when I've said that at times, I've heard people say, well, actually, well, yeah, you know, I can't stand. And I'm going, I see it came out. And then I say, look, you can meet people from African countries who you don't like. You can meet people from European or Asian countries you don't like. You don't then deny your connection to your own roots by recognizing you're of African descent. You just say, I was talking to this Nigerian guy, a man, if you want to say brother, and the man, he tried to rip me off in the store or whatever, right? But that doesn't mean every Nigerian now, that doesn't make any sense. Or people will sometimes say, well, but look at Africa today. Africa's in such turmoil, right? Well, yeah, Africa is in a lot of turmoil, there's no doubt. But the turmoil is the result largely of first the enslavement system, the asiento, followed by colonization or colonialism, followed by imperialism, which did everything it could coming out of the West primarily to prevent Africa from being able to ascend. That is not to excuse the fact that there are bad African leaders, and have been. But what we need to understand is many of those bad African leaders were sought out by outside powers that wanted to put them in power so they could continue to rape the resources of Africa. Africa's resource rich, but the people on the continent as a whole are resource poor, right? Something else that refers to what I said before, it's kind of like the Jedi mind trick, and that is one of my mentors, the late great C. Tessalone Keto, who was born in South Africa, trained as a historian, wrote a book called Vision, Identity, and Time. He basically was the first person to bring to my attention the history of South Africa and the process of telling the indigenous Africans they were not indigenous as part of the educational system. So they simply said, you all weren't here when we arrived. This is the formal education these people were getting. Also called them Kaffers, which is a derogatory term, as well as blacks. And what did the people who settled there, who were from the Netherlands and from the UK and other parts of Europe, but mostly from the Netherlands, meaning the Boers, and then the, like I said, many Brits. What did they call themselves, in particular the Boers? Afrikaners. What do they call the language? Afrikaans. Think about what I'm saying. Psychologically, they got themselves and many of the Africans, thank goodness not all, but many of the Africans, to identify with being black more than they identify with being African. And then they formally, meaning the Boers, they formally called themselves Afrikaners, meaning Africans. So think about that. So now you're the newcomer. You arrived in the Cape area a few hundred years ago. Yes, your ancestors have been here for a long time, for so long, if long means a few hundred years. But you have now mentally, and you might even say psychically, conveyed to yourselves you are more indigenous and have greater rights to the land than the people who you found when you got here. And you've convinced many of the people you found when you got here that they don't deserve to call themselves Africans, that they see themselves first as blacks. Because the only thing that can really make a difference that is lasting is then when you see all the components of it, right? Because you're trying to construct a whole new world view, a whole new reality, but I dare say one that's drawing from your own traditions. And I'll say it more clearly, the best of your traditions. Because you could say there are certain traditions that we did or of it that we need to leave alone. That's true of any culture or any nation or people. But what's the best, and even the great, and I do say great because I have great respect for him as well, Dr. Milena Karenga, who says, you know, you're supposed to draw from the best of Africa, the best of African traditions, put forward the best of what that means. So if certain things you need to be doing, whether it's people bringing up issues of excision or female circumcision and things like that they'll say is practiced in some African societies, I would agree that that may be going on for hundreds of years or thousands of years, but it's not something necessarily needs to be continued, right? But, and that's just my personal opinion. Other people may have a different opinion. I don't agree with that practice of excision or so-called circumcision for women. But I do think that when you're talking about the best of African cultures, respect for the elders, recognizing the interdependence and interconnection of all things, which means you have a greater respect for nature, or nature. It means that you clearly know that I'm important because we are important. The communalistic view versus the individualistic view. The desire to remain in harmony with nature, right? Those are just a few examples of what we would say were part of a traditional African world view. The extended family versus the nuclear family construct. That's why customarily, I mean, how long we've been calling each other brothers and sisters, right? This idea of recognizing, even when I went to visit family back home in Bermuda for the first time when I was a child, everybody calls everybody cousin. They were like, what's up, cousin? And I was like, cousin, right? Some people joke and say, well, it's because the country is so small, everybody is a cousin, because everybody's so related. But the other piece is, it has to do with our particular value system, our axiology, that you are an extension of me. So I'm trying to do what I can to make it in the world, but without causing you much or any harm if possible. And I certainly see your value. I'm not going to devalue you because you look like me. What am I saying about myself, right? If I do that. So the term black is no different than the term Negro. And so if somebody is using the term black, say, well, if you spoke Spanish, you'd be calling yourself a Negro. Do you accept Negro? And 99% of them obviously would say no, right? So like I say again, just say if you don't want to get with the Moor thing, as some people say, at least get with reason and say you're an African. I mentioned when we spoke a little earlier about there was something known as the All African People's Party that I was introduced to when I was in graduate school. And there was a sister and brother in Philadelphia who were members, and they were basically saying the same thing. And they weren't Moors. They were trying to tell people, look, you're African. Yeah, you're born in North Philly. You're an African living in North Philly, right? You're African living in Newark, right? And at the time, they had some success, but very little, because people wanted to be black. Why? Because black in their minds was better than being an African. I go back to what I said before. So the self-hatred, I would argue, is coming more from the person, this is my argument, who says that they don't understand why you don't use the word black. and them not having this, people say, flipping the script and saying, well, but for you, why don't you just call yourself an African? Well, because I don't want to affirm the fact that this is, being of a darker hue is good. I know that being of a darker hue is good because the people of Africa basically represent the same thing. Do you have to push that as does a Chinese person have to affirm yellow when they're arguing their value, or the yellow complexion of their skin or what have you, if that's going to continue to use these color names, right? To me, it's not a very consistent argument. Just call yourself African. And certainly, do you need to be calling somebody white if you really believe that they're not superior to you? I think about, and I've shared this once before, a situation with my uncle. My uncle worked for the Transit Authority of New York, and he talked about a conversation he had with a Japanese co-worker. And this is probably late 50s, maybe early 60s. Because I asked him when, he said sometime around the late 50s, early 60s. He said this Japanese man came in, he worked with him in the, for Metropolitan Transit Authority. He used to do carpentry, repairing the trains, the subways. And this man would basically keep to himself. He would just come in and bring his lunch, and he would sit down and eat, and he might nod or something to people, but he kept to himself. And this continued for some time. And then one day, my uncle, who was a member of the Moorish Science Temple, had understanding about the Moorish legacy, was talking to some brothers who worked with him, and laid it out. Sounded, I imagine, probably a lot like I sound in terms of sharing historical information and talking about context and everything else. And when he finished, he said that he sat down to eat, and this Japanese man got up from his table, which was a little further down, came over, bowed. He said, "Now we can talk." Amnesiac, right? Subjugated or oppressed. This idea of people not knowing, which results in many people who do know, not wanting to associate with us. Because as they say, we don't know how to act. And it's like, look, I don't know what I can trust you with in terms of talking with you. Or I don't know what you're going to do, because you may have no honor, because you don't know who you are. If you know who you are, you clearly have honor. If you know who you are, that's why, just as a sidebar for a minute, a sister or brother who really does their best to live according to the principles of the Christ, I ain't got nothing but love for them, right? I'm saying those who live the principles, because that's someone who essentially has some honor and is trying to do the best they can to make a better world. That's not to be confused with folks who go to church, but ain't nothing seeping in with regard to that. In fact, a lot of times people's focus now is on, what do they call it, prosperity gospel. That's good, that's well, but you also have to teach something about the ethical foundations of what the Christ was conveying. Because prosperity without ethics is an accident happening, not even waiting to happen. So that experience with my uncle, I think, is just a good example of what I'm saying in terms of a more contemporary and 20th century manifestation. And I myself have had experiences where people from other countries when they heard me talking about Moorish history and identifying myself as Moorish, even as I also emphasized that my father's from Cuba, said, why is your name? Look, I'm not denying the nationality of my father. What I'm simply saying, you can be Cuban and Moorish too. I'm pointing out that Moorish, in terms of, this is a reference to what was once the old imperial boundaries of the Moorish Empire. Even the name Cuba, is a Maghreb Arabic term for place of sanctuary. So, you know, and is that by accident? Right, and that's why it's not Cuba, it's Cuba. K-O-U-B-B-A would be the proper spelling. So they're even telling you, when Columbus went to Cuba, he's on the Oriente, he's on the eastern coast. Clyde Ahmad Winters, who's a historian, talks about looking through the Spanish sources and seeing in Columbus's journey account that he claimed to see minarets on the eastern coast of Cuba. That's Columbus when he's coming into the area on board the ship. So, is that a shock? So, the minarets are like a steeple on a church. Mosques have minarets. So to see this, if anybody would know what a minaret looked like, it would be some Spaniards on a ship in 1492, right? So based upon, like I said, Clyde Ahmad Winters' work that was in, and he quotes people like P.V. Ramos, and I think that was in African Presence in Early America, I think is where he had written that article, because it's in concert with, and that's an edited work by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. So it's actually Dr. Ivan Van Sertima's book. So this is telling us even about those connections, right? Brazilian Muslims that people often don't make reference to, which were part of these religious groups that brought different people of African ancestry together. So people practicing traditional, if you will, African spiritual systems, and then you had people who were practicing an African interpretation of Islam that goes back to the marabouts. And in fact, there are names, Maravitinas, Marabillos, which are Native American surnames. How do you get a Native American surname, Marabillos and Maravitinas? These are all derivations of Marabout. Even Moabite, which was a term used also for the people in the 11th and 12th century who were in, where? Al-Andalus. So you have the Spanish Catholics referring to these people as Moabita, who are also known as the Almoravids. So someone's going to tell me that, you see what I mean? Where the emphasis on trying to be quote-unquote Orthodox or Sunni will often shut down people's willingness to say, well, wait a minute, let me look at these other expressions of Islam. Now, like I said, I have nothing against someone who chooses to practice the orthodoxy, whether it's Sunni or whatever. But the point is, don't negate the value of what is contained in looking at the history of the Murids or the Marabouts and its connection to Moorish science teachings and its connections to Sufi tradition. Because what you do is, you should know better, right? The scholar is, the pen of the scholar is mightier than the sword. So the idea of saying, well, I'm about truth. Allah is not going to be angry with me for seeking truth. That's what I'm supposed to do. Right? Some people get all bent out of shape because they're questioning things. if questioning it is for the purpose of producing something that is destructive, there's a problem. But there's nothing destructive in Moorish science based upon what Drew Ali is talking about. How can you be upset with principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice? I'm trying to figure out what people are talking about, right? And if you're saying that you see the importance of recognizing your connection to your Creator, what is wrong with that? This discussion of Francis Cress Welsing, the late great psychiatrist, our elder and now ancestor, who talked about global white supremacy. And of course, he was building on the work of Neely Fuller, who had suggested this idea to her, and she as a psychiatrist then developed it. And basically, as you may know, it goes like this, that the European or the so-called white community largely has an inherent fear of black people, quote unquote, because of a fear of genetic annihilation. Now, that makes some sense, certainly when you look at what has happened in terms of the genocidal engagement by the European world. The problem with it, and I just say problem, meaning you can always find those aspects of what might be called an exception or outliers. You can look at periods in European history when Europeans wanted to intermarry with Africans. What period was it? The period of the Moorish Empire. Why? Because the Moors were the ones in positions of power. Because the Moors, who had introduced so much in the way of culture and advances in science, all of a sudden became very attractive. So there's less concern for issues of genetic annihilation because you're looking at these people as really having value. The idea of fear of intermarriage would certainly make much more sense if one is afraid that they're marrying into a family that will reduce their intellect, their ethical, if you will, core, or something that's, it's affiliated with what we would say now, genetics, right? But clearly, when Moors were in positions of power, the attitude of resentment towards us, just for being of African ancestry, Moorish, was not cut and dry. It's more complicated because it involves issues of power. So that if one is in a position of power and someone is in a position of knowledge, imagine, medieval historians have sometimes referred to the Dark Ages as cold, hard, and brutish. And that's referring to when Europe fell into a period of kind of cultural and social decay following the collapse of the Roman Empire, which was a great empire. The Moors, starting in the late 7th, early 8th century of the Common Era, have brought in the best knowledge from the ancient world, things that had existed in ancient Kemet or Egypt. In fact, George James talks about the Moors as the custodians of Egyptian culture and history, and George G.M. James doesn't get enough, I think, credit for his contribution in Stolen Legacy. Got his doctorate, as I understand, from Columbia University, so this was no slouch. But James said the Moors were the custodians of ancient Egyptian culture. The Moors, the Muslim world interacting, now has connections to China, to India, Nile Valley, Western Sudanic empires of Mali, Ghana, and Songhai, as well as Persia and throughout. And I would even venture to say connections and trade with the Americas. But all that ancient knowledge that Africans and Asians, and even the knowledge that the Greeks had possessed, was something that the Moors, meaning the African or African and Asian Muslim population, had brought together and are spreading throughout Europe, pulling Europe out of its dark ages, setting up institutions of higher learning, clearly, such folk are going to look very attractive, certainly to the rank and file. The only people who would see those individuals as not being attractive would be those in positions of power. Now you're talking about the conflict with the church, right, the Roman Catholic Church, who would see that, wait a minute, we have to do all we can to try to demonize or negate these people because we're losing our parishioners. So the history of Al-Andalus, or Moorish-controlled or Muslim Spain, is one of kind of these communities trying to negotiate this relationship, right, where you have people of Christian descent living next to people of Jewish ancestry and Judaism and Muslims, and that would include Africans, Asiatics or Asians. And when I say Asiatic in this context, it's because the mainstream tends to use Asiatic specifically just to use in reference to areas of Near Asia or Western Asia or the so-called Near East. Whereas I tend to use Asiatics, again coming out of the Moorish perspective, as representative of Africans and Asians collectively, if you will, the more melanated peoples, right? But this idea of the church then needing to, at that time, do all it can to devalue people of African ancestry, which also will then serve their interests with the rise of the asiento, the so-called enslavement trade, controlled by the Spanish, but ultimately contracted out to other European Christian countries. You can see how the devaluation of African people begins in the cultures of those places, right? And needless to say then, the pigmentocracy will start to rise with it, so that as the African world is eclipsing with the fall of the Moorish Empire being a major contributor to that, the rise of the pigmentocracy, where people are now, just like the power structure, like I said before, was different, people are trying to look more like those in power, and increasingly those in power will first be the Spanish and the Portuguese and eventually the British. The term Negro was used by Spanish and Portuguese speakers against the various African peoples they engaged, whether they were in the Senegal, Gambia region or elsewhere. They even used the term for Native Americans as well, people who were dark in complexion who they encountered in the Americas. The reason is because they didn't recognize, who was it? Oviedo and Sepulveda, who were two Spanish conquistadors who were theoreticians of issues of how to engage nations or races. How are we supposed to engage the world? And in fact, one of my mentors, Dr. Asante, who actually brought this out, I think in his book, Kemet, Afrocentricity and Knowledge. But he's the one that said that the conquistadors argued that it was okay to enslave the Indians because they didn't have nationality. Okay to enslave them because they didn't have nationality. In their minds, they had so objectified these indigenous peoples. They had reclassified them as, like I said, negros, or even if they use the term indios or Indians. Some of them, if they made treaties with different groups, then again, a treaty implies I recognize that you have nationhood. But if someone is adhering to the term that I'm using to deny your existence as a person, then you are telling me you're not a person under the law, right? You just told me you're a Negro, you're black. Terms that existed in U.S. law and in much of European law, and specifically the term black for those of British law, for someone who didn't have personhood, right? Or you'd have to qualify it. black person. But if you said blacks, it was understood that a person who you defined as black, or Negroes can't be citizens, because Negroes under the law were never meant to be citizens. Negroes are property. And when people tried to make blacks or Negroes into citizens, it caused a constitutional rift, right? That's the conflict. And I tell you, when you look at the foundations of the conflict between North and South, starting in the 1820s, also in my book I talk about the colored mariner laws and the colored mariner laws of 1822, which South Carolina passed because they said they needed to control people of color or people of African ancestry who were coming into South Carolina's ports, the Charleston port in particular. And they said if anybody who was colored came into that port, they were subject to being seized and put in jail and possibly sold. But guess what? That law didn't apply to Moors, and it didn't apply to Indians, East Indians, a group known as the Lascars. Now, this in part relates to the fact that there was a treaty that existed between the U.S. and the Moorish Empire, but it also relates to those who were simply following the law and saying, if you're calling yourself colored, Negro, black, this country requires that for you to be a citizen, you have to be free and a national. So even though this group is now called white, I can ask you, what's your name? O'Reilly. Oh, you're an Irish national. What's your name? Heimbach. Oh, you're a German, and so forth. If you couldn't affirm your nationhood, you were not a protected national. Democratic republics, which is what the country was and presumably still is, during the days of slavery, you would have had citizens, aliens, and slaves. Aliens can become citizens if they're naturalized. Slaves were legally defined as property. So if you're legally defined as a Negro can't have the rights of a citizen. At best, he can be given a granted privilege. So when also the late, great John Hope Franklin talked about quasi-free Negroes, quasi-free meant, yeah, you weren't enslaved, you weren't on a plantation, but your rights were essentially non-existent. You were given privileges by certain southern states in certain counties or what have you, because you were not seen as a threat, and you were just kind of functioning there, but nobody recognized you as a full citizen. Now, in contrast, if you were known to be a recognized national, even if you were dark in complexion, there were court cases, and I reference some of those also in my book, and I mentioned earlier the case of William Dungy and Abraham Lincoln, where people were told, I'm not going to let you vote because you look like you're a Negro. And so the person had to go to court and prove to them that they weren't Negroes. So how did they do it? By proving that they were either Native American or in some cases saying they were Moors, right? The petition of 1790, the Sundry Free Moors, right? And then the Sumter Moors, sometimes called Sumter Turks, another example, right? So if you were recognized as a national, even the Southerners in slave states who were upholding the law were saying, technically, under the law, these people can be citizens. That's why, and again, the legal cases that I quote in my book, where they say clearly, looking like a Negro or having an admixture of Negro blood doesn't necessarily make you a Negro. Now that may sound confusing to people, but it's because you have to understand how the law operated. If you're descendant of Negroes, but something happened where you've now reacquired or recaptured your nationality, you're no longer a Negro, right? That's what happened in the case of Abdul al-Rahman, who was taken and sold into slavery. He looked like any other so-called Negro. He's held until someone discovers he's not a Negro. And he was telling people all the time, I'm not a Negro. Why is he telling people in the course of them trying to figure out who he is? He thought, so even he knew that much. He kept saying, I'm not a Negro. And they said, well, I'm confused. You look like a Negro. It's because Negro in the popular mind, the perception one had meant that you were of predominant African ancestry. But that's not what it was. It's like people go to visit European countries, and if an African-American brother or sister went, as I've heard this, to different countries, and if they're over 6'4", the first thing they say is, you must be a ball player. You got to be a basketball player. And they're like, well, no. Well, because every African-American I've seen your height always plays ball. Well, in the context of what's going on in the 18th and 19th centuries, every Negro I've ever seen looks like this. But then that person, that's the difference between de facto and de jure, that average person living in the South, average European American, man or woman, they didn't know the law. They just doing their best to make a living, as they say. And all of a sudden they're told that that person who was enslaved next door for 27 years was not a Negro and should not have been enslaved. They're all kinds of confused. But who knew? The judges would have known. The lawyers would have known. The Supreme Court officials or justices would have known. That's why even in Moorish teachings, the Prophet said, go to City Hall, those who know the law, and you will get a favorable reply. Right? Understanding that that's the purpose of knowing something about the law. The sad part is some people have gone off in all kinds of other directions with that and misinterpreted what Prophet Noble Drew Ali actually taught with regard to that. We're a part and parcel of this, said government, with all the problems that the government has, all the foibles and problems that it's had historically. But if you recognize you're a full citizen, you know your full rights and powers to engage and change it. That's what citizens do.
In this documentary, we took a deep dive to uncover the hidden negative effects of black identity. We also demonstrated how you can begin your journey towards real freedom in America by embracing your Moorish descent. But this is just scratching the surface. Expanding on this topic are hours of more documentaries that completely disrupt the historical lies, societal norms, and narratives that have shaped the quote-unquote black identity. Now you can continue embarking on this groundbreaking journey of self-discovery that challenges conventional notions of identity and empowers the quote-unquote black people to redefine who they truly are.
The 14th and 15th Amendment does not address citizens of the United States of America. It addresses U.S. citizens. The Prophet Noble Drew Ali is specifically referring to us as citizens of the United States of America, and that, of course, is on our nationality identification card.
She took a sampling of different mummies to find that these mummies had ingested coca, the coca leaf. They also found high rates of tobacco, not African tobacco, American tobacco. Nile Valley civilization was in trade with different indigenous peoples in the Americas.
The Moorish Science Temple of America in 1913 created the corporation, the Corporation Moorish Science Temple of America of 1928, and they created it for a purpose. The United States of America created the United States for a purpose, and the purpose was that now we're going to create a federal government out of this here.
These and other series are all a part of our ongoing expansion of Amexem All Access, where we completely unpack a large range of pivotal topics. All Access members can access other deep dives into quote-unquote black identity, the Moorish Science Temple of America, Prophet Noble Drew Ali, and Moorish Science, as well as high-quality interviews, educational courses, a wealth of other resources. All this content is available on All Access, ad-free platform. By subscribing to the All Access annual plan, currently available for less than $3.66 per month, you gain full access to our ever-expanding library of content. Your subscription not only unlocks a treasure trove of knowledge, but also supports our team in creating more ambitious, evidence-based content. So don't wait to start your personal transformation journey. Watch these documentaries right now by clicking the button on your screen or following the link in the description. Your support enables us to continue shedding light on these crucial topics. Thank you for your support. Peace and love.
All right, everybody, we back. I'm hoping y'all got something out of this here, man. I did the best I could in presenting this from a whole lot of different angles. Let me add that once again, one more time, so you get a chance to see this in real life. On October the 26th, right here in Jacksonville, Florida, we'll be hosting the Vegan Fest. The Black Vegan Fest will be down here in Jacksonville, Florida. We have Moors from all over the United States down here. If you fish, if you're a fisherman, you love fishing, bring your fishing equipment with you. The river is right in the back of the property. You can do all the fishing you want. Make sure you bring your wife and children. We'll have fun and games. We will have live entertainment. The bands will be on stage with their wares, and they'll be doing their thing, and they'll be playing their instruments and stuff. Live entertainment. We also have professional chefs that will be down here to show you how to prepare nutritious meal for real, you know, and instead of the stuff a lot of people been eating, we'll show you how to do it right. We're going to show you how to grow your own food right down here, and we're going to show the children they'll be able to participate in growing their own food. The event is free for you to attend. Make sure you got some money because we're going to have vendors down here that's going to be selling the stuff that they have. So make sure you got you some cash in your pocket and you can take some stuff back home with you. Also, if you would like to be a vendor, we got until now until October the 26th for you to go to urbangeoponics.org. That's urbangeoponics.org. And get a hold of Brother Diallo Sakura, and he will tell you all about it. Okay? Right down here in Jacksonville, Florida, the Black Vegan Fest will be going on. Hold on. Okay, everybody. October the 26th, right here in Duval County, Jacksonville, Florida, the Black Vegan Fest will take place. Live bands, live entertainment, professional chefs will teach you how to cook healthy. If you are a vendor, go to www.urbangeoponics.org and sign up. Bring your fishing gear with you. If you're a fisherman, we got the river right in the back of the property. We'll teach you how to grow your own food. Teach your children how to do the same thing. You'll learn how to prepare meals healthy. There'll be fun and games for the whole family. October the 26th, the Black Vegan Fest, right here in Jacksonville, Florida. Don't miss it. Make sure you got some cash with you because vendors will be on hand and they'll be selling their wares. October the 26th, the Black Vegan Fest, right here, Jacksonville, Florida. Don't miss it. Be here. Okay. Well, we're down to the close of the broadcast, and I know I just gave a smidget of our Moorish science, and just keep in mind that all the lines in your hand, right hand or left hand, has meaning. The movements of the planets in your solar system has meaning. There's a whole lot more to go along with it, and I know they've been bringing out a whole lot of information about the ancient Egyptian mysteries and all this stuff. Got that too. So your nationality have a whole lot to do with you acknowledging your identity and for your status as a man and a woman. But also, I'm here to show you how to exercise your proper status in commerce, how to deal with your banks, how to deal with the sheriff department, how to deal with your government, how to deal with all of these, your debt collectors. All of that stuff, man, we got it right here. Go to TarhakaDataElimination.org and holler at your boy, and then we can rock and roll. Okay? But I've been your host, Tarhaka Amana El Bay, and until next time, y'all have a good evening.
the right talent,
the right attitude,
the right game plan,
the right amount of fight, pride, and determination.
When everything comes together, you just feel it.
And you'll let nothing get in the way of your goal.
You're ready to step up, meet the moment, and play to win. If you've been injured, put our force to work for you.
Farah and Farah, here for Jacksonville, here for good.
Do you know what it takes to be iconic? You are iconic. I am iconic. I love Iconic Agua. I drink Iconic Agua every day. Join the movement. Hydrate with Iconic Agua. Find Iconic Agua in all Kroger and Ralph stores across America. Because when you're thirsty, there's only one way to hydrate. And that's with the world's best tasting spring water on earth. Hydrate responsibly. Iconic Agua, where hydration meets greatness.